Welcome into this week's Degrees of Science. We've talked about different careers in STEM and science-related fields, but today we want to take a look into one of the fields of meteorology, one that I know a good bit about. That's the broadcast meteorology side, and we got an expert to talk about it, Tim Heller, who has worked in broadcast television for 35 years and now has his own company where he does coaching and consulting with meteorologists all across the country. Now, Tim, first of all, thanks for joining us. Most meteorologists have a good story of kind of how they grew to love the science. What sparked your interest in it?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I always love talking about the weather. And, like many meteorologists, I found the weather because of the weather. And I was 10 years old, grew up in eastern Iowa, had a tornado touchdown not far from my home. And I can remember seeing the damage afterwards. A friend of mine, his house completely destroyed, local community not far from ours also partially destroyed, downtown area, churches destroyed. And I remember thinking, wow, this is just wind that did all this damage. And I think that's where the bug got me early on.
So you've had a long career. Tell me kind of about how your career path went in ending up in Houston where you finished off.
Well, first of all, I never thought I'd work in Texas, and I never thought I'd work in weather. I actually wanted to be a news anchor first, and that's mainly because when I was in high school, we toured a local TV station, and I grew up a child of the 70s, and I was enamored by television, and I can remember walking into the studio thinking, wow, this is where they make television. And I thought, I want to do this. And we got to sit at the news desk, and I sat in the news anchor chair, and I thought, yeah, this is the job I want to do. So that was my initial career path. And so I went to school to study communications and journalism. And I was working part-time at a local TV station as a camera operator and inquired with the news director about doing an internship in news for the summer. And he said, well, as soon as I find somebody to do weekend weather, I'll fill that, they'll talk about internships. And I'm like, well, I'll do the weather. And I knew nothing about it. But all I knew from being the camera operator in the studio that it was kind of a rip and read job. You just rip the weather service and you kind of interpret it on TV. And I thought, well, I can do that. And I did it to get my foot in the door and turned out loving it and ended up going back to school later and studying the meteorology and never turned away.
That is definitely an interesting way into the TV side. Now we don't even have camera operators. We just got robots that move them around. How much from when you started to now does the business and just the technology changed in the job of broadcast meteorology?
I think there's been two significant changes. First of all, the computer graphics we use nowadays. I worked on the very first generation of weather graphic computers, and it was an 8-bit system. We had a total of 16 colors per map, and I spent about a half hour making every single graphic. So that was really my work day, was putting together the graphics. And nowadays, of course, it's full HD 4K graphics that require no rendering. They actually are created in real time as people are viewing them on television. So that's been the biggest change. And then secondly, how we distribute our information. When I started in the business, we did a simple 6 and 10 o'clock weather. Didn't even have a morning show in the television station I worked for. And nowadays, of course, it's not just 6 and 10, but multiple hours throughout the day and the weekend. Plus, we're doing digital platforms and mobile apps and streaming and social media. So the distribution has really increased. And in fact, we're really more broadcasters now than we ever were because we're casting our message broadly across multiple platforms simultaneously.
Yeah, I was joking with one of my younger meteorologists about they didn't even know you ever had to render graphics. Like, rendering? What are you talking about? It's like, yeah, you made every single thing, and if it wasn't right where it needed to be, you were in a lot of trouble when the 10 o'clock came. So for someone that's young, say high school, or even maybe thinking about college, that's interested in possibly doing broadcast meteorology, what advice would you give to them?
I think my advice is a little unconventional and very fatherly, and that is, don't be a jerk. I mean, I've worked with some really talented people who are awful off air, who are difficult to work with, and they're no longer working in the business. And they are extremely talented and could have gone a long ways, but they were difficult to work with. And news managers don't have time for that. So they don't get their contracts renewed. And then the second part of the thing I would advise is be open to any opportunity. I got my job doing weekend weather while in college because I applied for a studio camera operator position that paid $3.35 an hour, and I worked 1 hour a day. But I did it because I wanted a foot in the door. And I did the weekend weather because I wanted the foot in the door to be a news anchor, and ended up finding my true career path, which was in meteorology. But none of that would have happened if I had closed myself off to opportunities that popped up. So I think that's probably the biggest thing. It's just being open to whatever is available to you and giving it a try. Don't follow one narrow path. Give yourself some leverage to try different things.
Yeah, it's funny, just the difference. I've been lucky enough to be here in Waco at our station for my whole 18 years, but I would never have imagined, one, I would have got a job here when I started, and two, that I would end up in the same town following all the way through. So yeah, like you said, just to kind of follow the flow. Sometimes they can take you in some fun directions.
And that's a rarity, by the way,
Yes.
as you know, in this business. Most of us just jump around all over the place.
Well, you ended up in Texas, now you're in Houston, and you never thought you'd end up there. So very, very
That's
cool.
right.
So now you've got, I'm sure you've covered a lot of crazy weather, but the one people probably know most of is when Hurricane Harvey hit Houston. So in meteorology, we can get days on days of crazy weather. Just behind the scenes, what was it like covering that massive storm and the impact that happened?
Well, it wasn't my first hurricane, and it wasn't my first flood, but it was certainly the first of many other things. I remember the days leading up to it that, the forecast models putting out this tremendous amount of rain. And even before the WPC, the Weather Prediction Center, kind of put out their flood advisory on it, I had this little trick that worked for me almost 99% of the time when I was forecasting the weather here in Houston. The models very seldom got the true nature of our tropical downpours. And so if the raw model data was showing 3 inches, I would always double the amount. So if it was showing 3 inches, I would say on air we have 3 to 6. Most of us will get 3, some will get 6. And that worked about 99% of the time. Well, the raw model data was showing first 12 inches, which would have been 12 to 24, and then it was showing 15, and then 20 and 25. And I remember thinking, there's no way I can go on the air and say we're going to get 25 to 50 inches of rain. And furthermore, if we did get that much, what does that mean? What will happen? And so that was the uncertainty. Is the data correct? Are we really going to get that much? And by the way, we got 56 here in the Houston area, 63 over in Nederland, closer to Beaumont. But then the impacts of that, how do you describe that to viewers, except to say that we could get a lot of rain everywhere, which I think is kind of the message we ended up putting out there. But the second thing is, I remember, watching the video and seeing the look of desperation on people's faces, especially that first night when we started to get that first wave of rain. And we were getting pictures of people in their attics, looking down through their attic access and looking at the water that was several feet in their home. And we immediately got information that the Harris County Flood Control District was watching our coverage, and they sent us a message through NWS chat saying, tell people not to go in their attics because they may get stuck there. And I remember, going on the air saying, don't go in your attic. Harris County Flood Control recommends that if you have to evacuate your house, get on the roof. It's pouring down rain. We've got flash flood warnings and tornado warnings going into effect. And I thought, that's just absurd advice, but that's what we got to pass along. We don't want people to get stuck in their attics. And the third thing I'll remember from that is, again, getting back to the looks of desperation. At one point, I took my mic off and went to the bathroom, got some coffee and sugar loaded, and just kind of stood in the back of the studio, kind of watching our coverage a little bit. And we were getting these flash flood warnings and tornado warnings. And as you know, here in Texas, we don't have basements. So the advice with a tornado warning is go to the lowest level. Well, the advice for a flash flood is to go to the highest level. So it's like we're giving mixed messages here, and we're still hitting the data strong and, pushing out lots of numbers. And I remember walking over to the weather team saying, okay, we just need to be the calm in the storm right now. We need to help people get through this night because they are terrified. And so we need to tone down the rhetoric just a little bit here, give them the information they need, but let's have more empathy in our delivery. And that's what I encourage my clients to do today is have empathy and put yourself in your viewer's shoes every time.
Yeah, that's great advice. The one I can kind of compare to you talking about seeing the data and not believing it was the snowmageddon that we had. I can remember 10 days out, one of the models pointing at how cold it was. And I remember texting with a fellow chief, a friend of mine here in Texas, and we're like, there's no way that can be right. And I don't think the viewers realize what we see sometimes that we don't pass along, because, I mean, there's models that during hurricane season love that 10 days out try to produce a hurricane all the time. But, yeah, that's crazy. And the empathy part that, that sometimes you just have to be that person here to kind of that shoulder they can lean on and take them through some of that stuff. So that's definitely great advice. So you work in now coaching and consulting. Is what kind of advice do you pass along? With how much different the world is now with digital and busy and going here and there. What's some of the key advice you pass along to some of the meteorologists you coach?
Well, I think the biggest challenge is the workflow, managing the day-to-day. And so I talked a lot about communicating more effectively, which if you communicate more effectively, you're actually going to communicate more efficiently. And so we talk about, what are we doing on the day-to-day? How and let's shift away from trying to cover everything, and let's just focus on the essential thing, because this is where people get most of their forecast information these days, right here. And the research shows that 8 out of 10 people already know the forecast when they tune in to watch television. 9 out of 10 say it doesn't matter who they watch or where they get the weather information, that it's all the same. So I don't think we're doing a good enough job as broadcast meteorologists differentiating our coverage from the competition, which includes the smartphone, as well as every other weather device out there that has access to weather information. So we've got to do a better job differentiating ourselves. And I believe the way to do that is to focus on more of the essential information, editing the meteorology down to just the part that viewers need to know. For example, it took me a long time when I was still working on the air to stop showing the current temperatures at 10 o'clock. And it actually came from a viewer who said, "Why do you show the temperature at 10 o'clock? We're already in bed, or we're getting ready for bed." And I'm like, you know what, you're right. Do people really need the current temperatures? And I went back and looked, and I'm like spending 15, 20 seconds talking about current temperatures and current humidity and current wind. And there was no story there, it was just data. So taking that time, and rather than covering the just generic surface level weather data, taking that time and focusing on adding depth to the coverage by focusing on the essential information people need to know. And sometimes that message is about a storm that's coming 3, 4, 5, 6 days from now. And viewers get it. They don't need to know all the mundane, the current temperature and stuff. They want to know how the weather is going to affect them. And so our job, I believe, we can communicate more effectively if we look for the weather that's going to be the next impactful event.
So you were talking about the phone being the big competition now. So you've seen a lot of changes in broadcast meteorology in your time. The next decade, where do you think the changes are going in this business and with technology in general?
Well, forget the next decade. Let's talk about the next year or two, because I think artificial intelligence is already changing everything. And for a while, I kind of had a wait and see approach to it. And then I realized, okay, a lot of the apps that I use every day now have an AI component built into them. So I better figure out what this is. So I've been doing a lot of research on artificial intelligence, and I believe it could actually be very beneficial to broadcast meteorologists, as well as every other business out there. But in terms of weather, I think I look forward to the day where you walk into the studio and the system has already assembled for you all of your weather hits based on the forecast. And you sit down as a meteorologist and review some of the data that AI has already analyzed for you and said, hey, watch the storm Tuesday and Wednesday. Check this out on Thursday morning. And you go through all that analysis. And when you're done with it, you hit publish up in the corner, and everything on your workspace changes based on the forecast that you just approved as a meteorologist. And it now populates all of your weather hits, your social media. It queues them up with first draft versions of what you might want to put on Twitter and Facebook. And here's an update ready to go for your website. And you then can edit, do the final say on what you're going to put on the air, and you can focus on communicating that information, but using AI to not only help us with the analysis, but help us with the production, and then of course using AI to help us with the distribution, getting it out on all of these platforms simultaneously. It's kind of scary, but I think it's also pretty exciting too.
Yeah, because I think it's that challenge of you're worried AI is going to take your job compared to how do you use it to make your job better. And I don't know if you're the same way. When I talk to people, I think the biggest surprise people get is that we have to create all of our own graphics, and the amount. I don't know about you, but sometimes I think I should have had a degree in graphic art and digital media more than meteorology sometimes, because really when you get to the digital side, how much that is involved in what we do.
Yes. When I talk with, I was just visiting a client a few weeks ago, and they were talking about how complicated it was to get something over into their digital system, their website. And I said, well, walk me through the different steps. And they were describing it. And after they got done, I said, you can create a batch file for that, so that as soon as you're done recording it, you double click a little script on your desktop and it does all of that. The handshake with your server, pushes it over, converts the file into the right format, and might even title it for you if you give it the right code there. And I picture the day where I can just open up a script and say, type in, figure out how I can move this file over to this file and rename it this way, and the AI will just automatically do it for us.
Yeah, I agree completely on that. Yeah, we have our kind of quote here in our weather center: "Smarter, not harder." If we can find a way to do any of that,
Yeah.
and finding the stuff we really need to do versus not doing. So now that I know you still kind of have your foot in the pond, kind of working on the side of weather. What for day to day? Do you miss any parts of the broadcast side of stuff, other than now you have a really good schedule?
I get asked that all the time. The only part I really miss is the live TV. I got into this because I felt a connection with my viewers. Working in small markets and even bigger markets. I mean, you feel a connection with the people that you are serving, and I really do feel like we work in the service industry. Our jobs exist to serve our communities, and I took that responsibility very seriously. And so I kind of miss that aspect, having that direct connection with my community, with my viewers, and helping them stay safe during severe weather and helping them just live a normal, everyday, happy, healthy life. So that part of it I miss. Doing all of the other stuff, no, don't miss that at all.
Me either, except I still do it. Yeah, it is like I said, it's changed a lot since we first started. Well, Tim, I think really appreciate you taking some time to talk with us, and I appreciate all your kind of stuff that you write and the research you do. I know you have your consulting company, but all those tidbits you put out definitely help us as broadcast meteorologists. So I appreciate you taking some time to talk with me.
Yeah, glad to hear it, and thank you for having me. I appreciate it.